welcome to the deep dive. Today we're getting into something pretty interesting. The Indonesian Strategic Intelligence Agency. You might know it as BAIS TNI.
And our main source here is Wikipedia, actually. It gives a surprisingly good overview, history, structure, activities, some really quite noteworthy stuff.
Right. So the mission for you, listening in, is to get a clear handle on what BAIS is, where it came from, what it actually does, and maybe its global ripple effects.
Exactly. We're aiming to pull out the crucial bits, the intriguing stuff, without getting totally lost in the weeds. Consider this your essential guide.
And yeah, the source being encyclopedic gives us a solid base of facts to work from.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Where did BAIS actually start? It wasn't always BI, was it?
No, that's right. The story kind of kicks off in 1986. It began as the Army Psychological Center, or PSIAD.
Psychological Center, okay.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating is why it was set up. It was basically a counterintelligence move against the Central Intelligence Bureau, the BPI.
Right.
And the BPI, well, it had this history, apparently, of absorbing sympathizers of the PKI, the Indonesian Communist Party. So right from the get-go, you see internal politics driving the intelligence setup.
Interesting. So kind of an alternative intelligence source, maybe less politically tangled at that point. Then we get into the New Order era. What changed then? And maybe just briefly, what was the new order for Indonesia? Why did it spur these changes?
Right. Well, the new order came after a lot of political turmoil. It really focused on stability, national development, all under a pretty strong central government. And in that context, they set up the Strategic Intelligence Center, or Pusindolstrat. This is inside the Ministry of Defense and Security. And a really key figure here was L.B. Mordani. He led Pusindolstrat for a long time and even became the commander of the armed forces later on. It just shows how important strategic intel was seen back then.
So Pusindolstrat becomes the main intel body. But I noticed, didn't the source mention another group? Copcamtib Intelligence Task Force.
Ah, yeah, good catch. That's crucial. The Copcamtib Task Force, it operated separately from Pusindolstrat, and it was powerful.
Oh.
Yeah, like an operational intelligence unit during the Copcamtib era that was a time of, heightened security, more government control. So think of Pusindolstrat as maybe more long-term strategy, and Copcamtib as the sharp end, the operational arm, very broad powers.
Okay, so two parallel things for a bit. What brought them together?
Well, coordination, essentially. By 1980, they decided it made sense to merge them. So Pusindolstrat and the Copcamtib Task Force became the ABRI Intelligence Agency, or BIA.
BIA.
And ABII, that's important. That was the name for the Indonesian Armed Forces during that whole New Order period. So this merger basically consolidated military intelligence.
Right. And BIA sounds like they got involved in some pretty big, maybe even surprising operations, like Operation Alpha.
Oh, absolutely. Operation Alpha is, well, it's quite something. BIA actually negotiated with Israel.
Israel.
Yeah, and worked with Mossad, Israel's intelligence agency, to buy Douglas A-4 Skyhawk jets. It's this really unlikely partnership, It suggests a very pragmatic, maybe opportunistic approach back then. National interest first, even across major political divides.
That is surprising. What else was BIA up to? Any other big activities noted?
Well, they were involved in the negotiations around the Garuda Indonesian Airways Flight 206 hijacking. That was delicate stuff. And then, even more intriguing, maybe a bit controversial, they apparently helped some French GGSE agents escape.
The French intelligence?
Yeah, the ones involved in the Rainbow Warrior bombing in New Zealand.
Okay, that's quite a range of covert activity.
Yeah.
And then Cold War stuff, too. Supporting the Afghan Mujahideen.
Exactly. BIA was involved in sending weapons, logistics, things like AK-47s, Milan anti-tank missiles to the Mujahideen fighting the Soviets. So it shows Indonesia was, playing a part in those bigger global contests.
And not just military projection. Seems like there was a diplomatic intelligence side, too.
Precisely. BIA was negotiating with other ASEAN nations, trying to stop them sending weapons to the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. So you see them trying to shape regional security through intel and diplomacy.
Okay.
And then later, getting Harpoon missiles off old Dutch warships, always focused on boosting Indonesia's own defense capability.
So a really active, complex history for BIA.
Yeah.
Then, 1986, the name changes again to BAIS. Why the switch?
Yeah, the shift to BAIS, Indonesian Strategic Intelligence Agency, in '86, it was more than just a name change. It signaled a pretty big organizational rethink.
How so?
The idea was to create an agency that could handle a much wider range of strategic stuff, not just defense and security, but national development more broadly, sort of recognizing that intelligence needed to feed into a wider spectrum of government policy.
Right, a broader remit. But it took a while for it to be, like, officially official.
It did. It wasn't until 1999, after the Suharto era, during the post-Reformation period, that BAIS TNI got its formal legal recognition. That really cemented its place.
Okay, history covered. Let's shift to now, or at least its current form. How is BAIS structured today? Who's in charge?
Well, BAIS reports directly to the Indonesian National Armed Forces headquarters. The leadership answers to the top military commander, the Panglima TNI.
Okay.
As of late 2020, the head, the Kepala BAIS, was Lieutenant General Yudi Abermantio. The vice head, Wakil Kepala BAIS, Major General Muhammad Tawakkal Saiful Haksidik. Although, the source also mentions another name, Major General Ahmad Riyad, as vice head around April 2021, so there might be some fluidity in leadership roles.
Right, personnel changes happen. And it definitely feels like a secretive outfit, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Highly secretive is the term used. There's a presidential decree from 2019 that lays out 8 directorates inside BIS, but they're just identified by letters, A through H.
Just letters.
Yep, Director A, Directorate B, and so on. That deliberate lack of public naming really underlines the clandestine nature of it all.
Lettered directorates.
Yeah.
Very spy novel. But we do know a little about what they do, right?
We do have some pointers. Directorate A is apparently domestic military intelligence. B is foreign military intelligence.
Okay.
C covers defense and military intelligence generally. D is military security intelligence. E is fascinating psychological operations.
PsyOps. Yeah, that always makes you think.
Doesn't it? Then F is admin and finance, standard stuff. G is research and production. And H, the newest one from 2019, is for strategic defense potentials intelligence, whatever that specifically entails.
Right, I'm a bit vague on that last one. And there are these parental units, too. SAT&DUC, BAIS TNI.
Yeah, SAT&DUC, BAIS TNI. These seem to be key operational commands under BS, maybe based on geography or specific intel types. They're headed by brigadier general, so, pretty significant commands.
Sounds very structured, very layered. They even have their own training system.
They do. 3 levels mentioned. Basic, secondary, and strategic intelligence training probably ensures a pipeline of skilled people from basic gathering up to high-level strategic thinking.
And what are these trained people actually doing? What are the core tasks of BI?
The duties listed fall into 3 buckets: investigation, security, and something called raising coaching.
Raising coach?
Yeah, could mean development, nurturing assets maybe. It applies across materials and assets, personnel, and significantly, news and information. So a broad security mandate. And crucially, BAIS oversees the Indonesian defense attaches in embassies worldwide. That's their global reach.
A global network,
Yeah.
Mostly in the shadows. It brings us to their activities and some of these international links the source mentions. That 1997 counter-intel op in Jakarta sounds intense.
It really does. Yeah, in 1997, BAIS apparently busted an Australian spy believed to be ACIS, Australian Secret Intelligence Service.
Right.
This person was supposedly meeting an Indonesian military intel officer for a document drop. BAIS counterintel was watching, and apparently the Indonesian officer involved was removed very quickly, never worked in intel again. It's a rare peek into that whole cloak and dagger world.
And it seems Australia features again long-running suspicions about infiltration.
Yes, that's another strand. Australian intelligence has reportedly been worried for years, going back to maybe 1999, that Indonesian intel, probably BAIS, managed to recruit someone high up in the Australian government.
Recruit someone, like a mole.
Potentially, yeah. The fear was this person could be feeding sensitive info back, maybe even influencing Australian policy to benefit Indonesia. The source says that despite investigations, this alleged recruit was never actually found, at least as of 2013. Sort of an unresolved mystery.
Wow, that's a major concern for any government. And the Australian connection continues with reports about Chinese surveillance tech.
Yeah, that adds another twist. Around 2013, reports emerged suggesting Indonesian military intel, BIIs included, was using Chinese surveillance equipment.
To do what?
To target Australian officials, companies, individuals. The scale mentioned was potentially huge, thousands of Australians in Indonesia, maybe other Western countries too. And this cooperation supposedly started around 2011.
Which naturally leads to thinking about China-Indonesia intelligence cooperation more broadly. What's the suggestion there?
Well, The source suggests this coordination involving both BIs and the BIN, the State Intelligence Agency, has been beneficial for both sides.
How so?
The idea is China gets valuable insight into Southeast Asian politics, maybe intel on Western plans and strategies in the region via Indonesia. Some analysts apparently think this cooperation might even be helping China's growing influence. It hints at a possible shift in Indonesia's strategic partnerships, maybe moving beyond just information sharing to something more like strategic alignment.
And the implications of that alleged cooperation, they sound pretty significant. The source uses terms like impact in geopolitics, maybe destabilization.
It's a strong claim, yeah. But the thinking behind it seems to be that intel gathered by BIs and DIN, especially from the region, Australia, Western interests in Indonesia, if that's shared with Chinese intelligence.
Then China potentially has a better picture.
Exactly. A better picture to understand, maybe counter Western influence, which could, contribute to shifts in the global power balance.
It sounds almost like a strategic intel pact. And the source even theorizes about why Indonesia might have sought closer ties with China.
Yeah, interestingly, the theory put forward is that maybe BAIS itself pushed for closer ties?
BAIS initiated it.
Possibly. The reasoning offered is that BAIS might have predicted Indonesia's geopolitical clout would weaken after the Suharto years, and they saw threats, internal and external. So cozying up to China through intel cooperation could be seen as a strategic play.
How so?
To get a powerful friend, basically. A deterrent, more bargaining power, maybe even a way to hit back if needed on the world stage.
That paints BAIS as very strategic, very forward-looking, not just reacting to events. Okay. And finally, the See Also section just reminds us, doesn't it, that BAIS is part of a much bigger picture, BIN military intel generally, covert ops.
Exactly. It's one piece, albeit an important one, in a much larger, complex web of intelligence agencies, nationally and internationally.
Okay, that was quite the deep dive into BAIS TNI. Let's try and surface with the key takeaways. What should people remember?
I think the main things are BAIS TNI is a major Indonesian military intelligence agency. It's got this complex, sometimes surprising history, starting as one thing and evolving. Its structure is deliberately murky.
Right, the lettered directorates.
Yeah, but it clearly covers a wide range of intel functions, and its activities definitely go beyond Indonesia's borders. These connections, real or alleged, with other agencies suggest it could have a real impact on geopolitics.
And for me, a couple things really stand out. That early cooperation with Mossad is just... wow.
Yeah.
That's a historical nugget. Or maybe these ongoing, unresolved questions about infiltrating Australian intelligence. That's got all the hallmarks of a classic spy tale, doesn't it?
Both definitely highlight the hidden, complex nature of this world. And hopefully, for you listening, this gives you a foundational grasp of a key player often unseen in regional, maybe even global security.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with. Considering this reported intel sharing with China, and these lingering suspicions about infiltrating other governments, what does that mean for trust between nations? For the balance of power as we move through the 21st century, what questions does it raise for you about how intelligence gathering works in this hyper-connected world we live in? Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.